On May 22nd, Oscar Smith was executed by lethal injection in Tennessee, bringing an end to a case that had haunted the state for over 3 decades. Fueled by obsession, rage, and a twisted need for control, Smith left behind a scene so brutal it still echoes through the halls of Tennessee's justice system. But what no one knew at the time was how far Oscar Smith was willing to go. We're going to break down what happened, what he chose for his final meal, and the very last words he ever spoke. Oscar Smith wasn't your typical criminal. In fact, on paper, he looked like an ordinary man. No criminal record, no history of aggressive behavior. He was a husband, a father, a man who once sat at the kitchen table like anyone else. But all of that was long gone by the time October came, because underneath that calm surface, something darker was building. And eventually, it would erupt into something unthinkable. 3 lives lost, and a town forever changed. Born on March 25, 1959, Oscar grew up without any major issues. He lived a fairly normal life. He got married, had 2 kids, Laura and Merle, and for a while, things seemed stable. But like many stories that end in tragedy, that stability didn't last. After his first marriage fell apart, he sent his kids to live with his parents. Then on August 8, 1985, he married again, this time to Judy Smith. Judy had 2 sons of her own, 16-year-old Chad Burnett and 13-year-old Jason Burnett. The blended family looked picture-perfect from the outside. Oscar and Judy even had twin boys together. For a while, things seemed peaceful. But all of that would come crashing down, and the unraveling would be anything but quiet. It started with arguments. Then came the separation. Divorce proceedings began. And that's when Oscar started to lose control. The court gave Judy temporary custody of the twins, with Oscar only allowed weekend visits. To him, it felt like he was losing everything. And that's when the rage began to boil. He started making threats, calling Judy at work. Over and over again. She worked at a Waffle House, and most of the time, she didn't even answer. Her co-workers did, and what they heard on the other end of the line was terrifying. Threats to shoot her, to harm her with a sharp weapon, to unalive Chad and Jason, because, as he put it, she treated her sons better than his twins. But that wasn't even the worst of it. In June of 1989, something snapped. Oscar got into a big physical fight with Jason at his trailer in Pleasant View. What happened next was almost unbelievable. He bit Jason on the back so hard it left marks. He put a gun to the boy's head. Then he ordered Judy and the kids out of the house, but not before threatening to unalive her if she called the police, took the car, or tried to leave with the twins. 2 months later, in August, Judy came back to the trailer to collect some of her things. What happened that day was horrifying. Oscar tied her up. He overpowered her, then dragged something sharp across her throat and told her, flat out, he was going to end her life. But Oscar Smith wasn't done tormenting Judy, not by a long shot. This wasn't some sudden snap. It was rage, simmering for weeks, and a twisted sense of control. At one point, just 2 or 3 weeks before everything went to hell, Oscar showed up to pick up his twins for visitation. He was cold, ice cold. He looked Judy's father in the eye and said, "You tell Judy that I've been playing with her with kid gloves, but now the gloves are coming off." And that wasn't just an empty threat. He'd told people before, if Judy ever left him, he'd make sure she wouldn't be breathing anymore. And if that wasn't disturbing enough, it got darker, more twisted, more calculated. Smith actually approached a coworker with an offer. "You unalive Judy for me, I'll unalive your wife for you." A life for a life offer, like it was nothing. Then, just 2 weeks later, he made another chilling statement. He said he'd pay $20,000 to anyone who could take out Judy and her 2 sons, but not the twins. He was very clear. The twins were to be left alive. The threats had turned into plans, and the plans were about to become real. Then came the night of October 1st, 1989, the night everything changed. It happened inside Judy Smith's home, in the Woodbine section of Nashville. By then, Smith wasn't just threatening, he had a plan. and that night, he carried it out. He walked into the house and unleashed pure terror. He fired Judy in the neck. Then he struck her with a sharp weapon over and over again. Chad, her 16-year-old son, was shot in the eye, the chest, and the side. Jason, just 13, was struck too in the neck and stomach. But before Jason took his last breath, at around 11:20 p.m., he managed to grab the phone and dial 911. A young voice, later identified as Jason, screamed, "Help me!" And in the background, his brother Chad could be heard shouting, "Frank, no, God, help me!" Then the line cut out, but not before Jason gasped out one final thing. 324 Ludi Street. Officers were dispatched and arrived within 5 minutes. They knocked. No one answered. It was quiet. Too quiet, and so they left, assuming it was a false call. But it wasn't. Oscar Smith had already done what he came to do, and he had vanished into the night. It wasn't until 3 p.m. the next day that the horror was fully uncovered. Inside the house, officers found Judy, Jason, and Chad, all lifeless. Chad's body was lying face up on the kitchen floor. The room was a disaster. Red covered the floor and walls. The phone had been ripped from the wall. And lying nearby was a tool known as an awl, something like an ice pick, used for piercing leather. Chad had been shot 3 times, once in the shoulder, once in the chest, and once right between the eyes. The last 2 shots were fired at point-blank range, but that wasn't all. He'd also been struck repeatedly in the chest, back, and stomach. His throat had been slashed, and his hands, covered in defensive wounds, showed he fought to the very end. Judy Smith's body was also found lying on her back in the front bedroom. Red stains splattered across the paneled wall beside her bed. She had been shot, once in the left arm, but the fatal wound was a gunshot to the neck, fired from less than 2 feet away. That shot severed her spinal cord, causing instant paralysis, rapid unconsciousness, and total blackout. But the horror didn't end there. Shortly after she was unalived, her neck was slashed. Like Chad, she was struck with a sharp weapon resembling an awl or ice pick. The medical examiner concluded that both Judy and Chad had passed from multiple gunshot and stab wounds. Jason, the youngest son, was found on the floor at the foot of his mother's bed. Unlike Judy and Chad, he wasn't shot. But he had been brutally harmed. His neck was slashed, and his torso had been repeatedly wounded. 2 fatal wounds to his abdomen had severed major veins, causing his small bowel to protrude through the wounds. Defensive wounds on his hands told the story of a desperate fight before he took his last breath. All 3 victims had been lifeless for at least 12 hours before anyone discovered them. No signs of forced entry were found, but the back door had been left open. The house showed clear signs of big struggle, especially in the kitchen where a table leg was broken off. A .22 caliber cartridge was found on the den's rug, matching bullets recovered from Judy and Chad's bodies. Ballistics experts confirmed the same gun fired the fatal shots. Bullet holes were scattered across the front bedroom and the den. A trail of body fluids led from the den down the hall to the kitchen, while red drops in the bathroom suggested someone tried to clean up. And everything pointed to Oscar Smith. When Oscar Smith was finally arrested and brought to trial that October, he painted a different picture. He claimed to have been with the children earlier that night, but said he left by 10:30 p.m. Smith worked as a machine tool repairman and said he had to travel to Moorhead, Kentucky the next day for a job. But something was off. When police picked him up on October 2nd, he never asked why. Even more suspicious, he referred to his wife in the past tense, a slip that would haunt him later. At trial, the evidence mounted against Smith. Investigators testified they found a red palm print on the sheet next to Judy's body. The print was missing the same 2 fingers Smith was missing, sealing the connection. Then, there was the 911 call Jason had made moments before being unalived. Recorded and timed perfectly with the crime. Everything pointed straight at him. It seemed he wouldn't escape justice. Still, Smith fought back. He hired a fingerprint expert who challenged the evidence, claiming the investigators had made numerous mistakes and couldn't definitively identify the print. After weeks of testimony, cross-examinations, and defense challenges, the courtroom held its breath. On July 26, 1990, the jury in Davidson County handed down the verdict. Oscar Smith was sentenced to death. The execution was initially set for December 3, 1990, by electric chair. But that date was put on hold, giving Smith time to appeal. Smith fought back fiercely. He joined lawsuits claiming that lethal injection was cruel, state-sanctioned torture that caused victims to feel like they were drowning and burning alive. His execution was rescheduled multiple times, June 4, 2020, then February 4, 2021, both postponed due to the pandemic. The next date set was April 21, 2022. In March 2022, Smith's lawyers filed a clemency petition with Tennessee Governor Bill Lee, asking for his sentence to be commuted to life without parole. Because Smith was sentenced before 1999, he had the right to pick his method, lethal injection or electric chair. But on April 1, 2022, it was announced that Smith declined to choose. That meant lethal injection would be the default. Smith's fight wasn't over. In April 2022, he filed a motion to reopen his case, pointing to new DNA evidence on the weapon. But on April 11th, the Tennessee court denied the request. Still determined, Smith asked the Tennessee Supreme Court on April 14th to vacate his execution date. 4 days later, on April 18th, the Supreme Court refused to hear the appeal and denied the request. On April 19th, Governor Bill Lee said he wouldn't intervene in the execution. Then, just days before the scheduled date, on April 21, 2022, the execution was postponed because of an oversight in preparing the lethal injection. Governor Lee later explained on May 2nd that the proper protocol had not been followed. Finally, in March 2025, a new death warrant was signed. Smith's execution was set for May 22, 2025. Yet again, Smith refused to pick his method. So, Tennessee's default method was still going to be used: lethal injection. Oscar Smith was 66 years old on the day he faced the ultimate sentence.